Hello, and this is the intro to the nervous system with Abby, Helen, and Alison. So our first slide, we have the intro to the nervous system. And the nervous system is broken down into two major parts. We have the central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. Then we move into the peripheral nervous system, which is broken down into sensory and motor. Then motor is broken down into autonomic and somatic functions. And then autonomic is broken down even further into parasympathetic and sympathetic functions. But just an overall definition of the nervous system is to stimulate movements, it's the control center of the body, it maintains homeostasis, and it is a communication network. And just as a quick intro, there are two types of cells within the nervous system, and that is the neuron and the neuroglia. And then just to get more specific with the functions here, the peripheral nervous system sends signals to the central nervous system, and then the central nervous system processes that information from your sensory stimuli, and then their peripheral nervous system then carries out the actions. So your peripheral nervous system has your motor reflexes, so voluntary movements, which is defined as your somatic areas. And then we have your autonomic functions, which are involuntary, like blinking and adjusting your posture. And then to break down autonomic even further, we have sympathetic movements, which is your fight or flight response. And then your parasympathetic movements, which is coming down and resting from your fight or flight responses. And then to go on further about your sensory information, it just carries the information to your central nervous system from your senses. Then to go deeper into your functions, you have three types of neurons. You have sensory neurons, which carry information towards your spinal cord. Then you have your motor neurons, which carry information away from your spinal cord. And then interneurons are the in-between part, and they connect your neurons together. Neuroglia you have different types of those as well. You have astrocytes, which form your blood-brain barrier, and they are the structural framework to your central nervous system. Then you have your oligodendrocytes, which puts a myelin sheath around your axons of your nerves. Then you have your microglia, which are kind of like macrophages in your bones, but they dispose of debris within the brain. And then you have your epidermal cells, which lines your ventricles of the brain, and it also secretes cerebral spinal fluid, which just acts as a way for protection and buoyancy within your brain. Then moving into protection, there are a lot of different ways that your body protects your brain. First of all, you have your skull, which directly protects your brain. Then you also have your vertebrae and your vertebral column, and that protects your spinal cord. And then, like I talked about before, the cerebral spinal fluid protects the brain and the spinal cord by providing a cushion and providing the brain with buoyancy, so when your brain moves around, it doesn't impact it too much. And then, like I said before, there's the vertebral column, and then all of your neuroglia, like I just mentioned, like astrocytes, your oligodendrocytes, and your microglia, they all support and protect the brain in their own functional ways. And then with integration, we put that all together. Your neurons work with your neuroglia for the optimum performance. For example, we have protection and they structure the linings like I've talked about before. So those work together so you can really get the optimum performance from your nerves. And then the sensory nerves and your PNS provide a stimuli to your central nervous system. And then like we talked about before, your central nervous system directs that into motor pathways of your peripheral nervous system. And then we have different organizations of all the things. So first of all, with the layers with protecting the brain, the first layer that you have is your skin, then you have your skull, and then we have the meninges before you get to the brain. You have the dura mater, the arachnoid, and the pia mater, and those are just three layers of connective tissue that protect the brain. So when you open up the skull, the first thing you don't see is the brain. It's actually these three layers of protective tissue. And then your brain is even broken up into pieces. Some of the three main parts are your cerebellum, your brainstem, and your cerebrum. Your cerebellum is the place where balance and coordination of motor activities is there. And then also your learned movements. So when it's said that your cerebellum has your muscle memory, that's just it. You know, you remember how to walk, you remember how to ride a bike without even realizing it, and that's all in your cerebellum. And then we move into your brainstem, which is made up of your pons and your medulla oblongata. And that is just, it regulates your autonomic system, like your heart rate, your breathing rate, the amount that you sweat, the hormones that you secrete. That all comes out of your brainstem. And then moving into your cerebrum, there are a lot of different, there's 4 different lobes of your cerebrum, and each of those have their own, they each have their own cortexes. So we have our frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes. And just as examples of different cortexes within the lobes, the frontal lobe has your prefrontal cortex, which has intellectual functions. Your primary motor cortex has your direct voluntary movements. The premotor cortex, it coordinates your learned movements. And then your speech center is responsible for processing your breathing patterns and then vocalization patterns. And that is in your left hemisphere of your brain. Then we move into the parietal lobe, and the different cortexes within that is mainly the primary cortex, which deals with pain receptors, your touch receptors, and that deals with touch and pain and pressure, and then realizing temperature in your external environment. And then your somatic sensory association area, it just processes all of the information from the primary cortex. Then in the back of the head, we have your occipital lobe, and that actually does your visual cortex and your visual association area. So that processes your information from your eyes and your optic nerve, and it processes the images that you see. And then in your temporal lobe on the sides of your head, we have your gustatory cortex, which does your taste, your olfactory cortex, which does your smell, and then your auditory cortex, which does your sound. And then there's also another area called the general interpretive area, and it's also called Wernicke's area, which just receives sensory information, mostly auditory, and then it processes it and gives you the ability to comprehend what you're learning. And then just some more information about organization. Just like we've already talked about before, but the brain is really organized to function as a whole. So a lot of parts of the brain are firing off at one time to move your arms and legs when you want to, but then you also have to blink and regulate your heart rate. But you don't think about all these things at once, but your brain is complex enough and all of the parts work together at the same time to carry out many functions at one time. Then we move into exactly how the brain communicates. The first part of making a communication within your brain is your membrane potential, and that is positively charged potassium and negatively charged chlorine switch places across the membrane of the axon. So that's just meaning like how a communication between nerves gets started. Then we move into depolarization. And that is when an action potential, so basically a signal from your brain, is reversed and the charges inside and outside the axon switch. So that's seen here, like your positive charges on the outside of the membrane and the negative charges on the inside of the membrane, they switch, and that is caused by a stimuli to open up your sodium-potassium channels and opens up the ability to have a charge. And then obviously we have our action potential, which is, it kind of has an all or none principle. So either all of the neuron and all of the everything is done, it can't stop in the middle. And then we have our refractory period, which is, so the nerve returns so that the axon can rest for a little bit, so it's not in a constant state of overuse and it doesn't get worn out. This is to avoid overstimulation, but it's not like it's for a long time. It's for milliseconds within your body that one nerve is resting. And then we have our synaptic terminal, and that's when the axon, there's an axon ends and the synapsis begins and it is reached. Then there's a release in a neurotransmitter from your presynaptic end, and then that neurotransmitter enters into your synaptic cleft. Then it's that action that hormone has, that neurotransmitter has, is then picked up by your postsynaptic neuron, which is usually a dendrite of another nerve ending. And then it just causes that same response. So once one nerve ends, another one begins, and there is a signal sent through hormones and other neurotransmitters, and then those neurotransmitters just enter right back into the presynaptic neuron. Thank you for learning with us today, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you.